Hey everybody, welcome to Hashflag Nation. This is Jerome Hardaway. I'm Geek at Arms for Vets Who Code. Well, we're here today is I'm here to talk to one of my favorite people on Twitter, a fellow brother in combat arms, and he's also a second career dev who has transitioned into tech from the military as well, although from a different aspect. And I'm very excited to just be able to ask him questions and learn about this person. Go ahead and introduce everyone to yourself, Tim.
Hello, my name is Tim Banks. I am the principal cloud economist at the Duckbill Group, where I use engineering principles to help companies save money on their AWS bill.
All right, awesome. So the first question that I'm going to ask everyone is, what is your glorious purpose? What's the thing that pushes you beyond all things to get shit done? What's that thing?
Honestly, it's to be an example, right? And it's an example of a few things. And one example of what it looks like to be a person of color from a background that's non-standard in a tech to achieve excellence. Its purpose to, as a man, to show, that you can be emotionally intelligent and vulnerable and kind the best you can be without compromising your, so-called masculinity, and also to win a world championship at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
To be vulnerable and to choke people out. Okay, cool. That's it. Those that represent tech, be vulnerable, choke people out. That's the tweet. So let's start with the representing tech. How important is that to you being a representative as a person of color in tech? And as a dual minority because you're a person of color and you're a Marine veteran. So how important is that to you, especially dual sides? Because I know like my journey in this is wild. So yours has to be like insane.
Yeah, so I think it's important because I know when and I'm long in the tooth industry. I first came in 1998. And when I came in, right, and when no brothers in tech, there's definitely no black women. And if they were, we were all working help desk. We're all working like, some low level systems administration. We weren't decision makers. We were in sales, right? Because there were not high level people of color in the tech industry as developers, as engineers and everything like that. Just a few, but we were not really represented. There weren't a lot of folks represented who were people of color and did not have, a lot of higher education or degrees. And ones that did have, almost all had degrees. There weren't people that had what we consider now to be non-traditional backgrounds. But the people when I came in who had been doing this as long as I had now, like I've been doing this 23 years. When I came in, people who were doing this for 23 years, right? They were working on still like punch cards, COBOL and stuff like that. They were working on machines that had vacuum tubes in them. So like, they had been through some stuff and the industry looked a lot different back then. Like you talk about, if you haven't ever seen Hidden Figures, stuff like that. But there were a lot more women at the beginning of the industry, a lot more women, a lot more people of color, because it wasn't really, the industry wasn't considered masculine or manly and it wasn't lucrative. And as soon as it became lucrative and money making, right, that's when it became much less inclusive. So that when I came in, you had dress codes almost exclusively that were, based almost around the military contracting from whence most of tech came. It was suits, it was, business casual, which meant polos and khakis. It was short hair, it was no tattoos, and if you were a person of color, you had to assimilate if you wanted to move up. You couldn't be unapologetically anything unless you were white. So going from there to where we are, the elite year of our Lord 2021, where I can be a black Mexican guy with long hair and tattoos, beard, openly queer, openly neurodivergent, being open and honest about struggles with mental health and mental illness, and just being a whole person, being very open about my stances on societal issues and not having that affect my employment is a place I never thought I would be when I came in the industry. And the reason that I think it needs to be done as an example, because while the folks who are coming in the industry now have it way better than we had it when we came in, they need to see themselves represented in tech excellence. They need to see themselves represented in higher levels so that they can understand that it is attainable. The thing that would happen, the reason people out, not only because the environment was toxic, because we didn't have anybody like us who was making policy or who was helping to define the culture, but also because it didn't really look like there was a future for us anyways. So, like I said, folks coming in who,
I can see that because I tell people like my story of being in the military, transitioning out, and even talking about learning how to code, how my parents thought I was insane. And my little sister, she was like, there's no way anyone's going to pay a black guy to sit behind a desk and learn how to code. And this was 2010, 2011. So this wasn't, I'm not a person that's been in the game for a long period of time. So it was a crazy experience. I was like, yo, I thought things changed. So I definitely understand you can't be what you can't see. And that's why we try to be loud and out there and showcase and try to bring as many people up as we can. When we're talking about bringing people up, because I know you do a lot of things with diversity. So when it comes to African Americans and people who are black and brown, well, let's shift to the things that, because we met because we were both veterans. So
Mhm.
we connected on that veteran scope. How important is he as a veteran being in this world? How does it make you feel? What are you trying to do? How do you deal with the battles? Because we have a lot of similar issues where we both come from a combat oriented career field, but we also are more empathic, more, I guess, center left than our peers that get the opportunity to be the loudest when it comes to being veterans. And it's hard, right? It's hard
Yeah.
being black, center left, and a veteran at the same time. It's hard not to be a jerk. But how do you navigate the dualities of those cultures?
Yeah. So where I grew up and lived for a long time before I moved to Austin was in the Hampton Roads area, Virginia, which, as anybody who's in the military knows, like 7 major military bases within a 50-mile radius, right? We were going to be the second people to get nuked after DC. And that was no secret. But because of that, there were a lot of military folks, a lot of vets, a lot of retirees, and a lot of people of color. Area I grew up in, Norfolk, Virginia, it was like almost 40% Black people, right? So there was a lot of Black veterans there. And that was just a thing. The other thing too is that my family has a legacy of military service going back to the Civil War as Black men. So we are accustomed to ride that kind of line of being both Black and proud. And so, my generation was the first generation of people that served that could still, could drink water from wherever they wanted to, like when they were coming up, could look white people in the eye coming up. So I was afforded far more opportunities than my dad was, who was commissioned in 1968. So it looked different for me, but there was a lot of fellowship among Black veterans in my area because there was a lot of us. So we were giving each other opportunities. And even in my first forays into tech, which was working, tech support for a computer manufacturer that had a plant down there, still probably that tech support area was probably 30% Black and at least half of us were vets. So it was a good foray into it. And especially because it was like, I had done, 5 years before I got out. And some of these cats had been in, were retirees. So I'm in my early 20s and some of these cats are in their 40s, and so they're giving me some mentorship. They're giving me some advice, taking them under the wing, especially if they've been longer in civilian careers, like telling you how to adjust and how to do stuff like that. So that's where I got a good runway, got some good guardrails coming up as how to ride that line, right? Especially in an environment that was, like I said, very, very toxic to people who are unapologetically Black, but we had all been used to being in the military. And as you know, in the military, right, you got the dress standards, you got the grooming standards, you got all this kind of stuff like that, you are used to finding ways to maintain your individuality and your own thoughts, even with a very structured and strict environment. And so that's what it was growing up. Because I had been in the Marine Corps, right? I could handle with the standard, glassy-eyed 1,000-yard stare, when the bullshit came rolling downhill, and then you just did it, right? I think Amazon calls that a leadership principle of disagree and commit, because, in the military, we disagree with a lot of stuff, but you do it anyways. You
Yes, I
know?
think that's the biggest thing most people in the military don't agree with everything that's going on, but they do the work because they have a value of the mission being of a higher purpose. So it's like, no, we don't enjoy it. We know what's at stake or we know what we signed up for.
Yeah.
All right. But you said something that I really want to get into the idea of cloud economists, but you also said something that, because we deal with Vesico, we deal with people who are transitioning out the military into technology. And you said about like simulate and then transition into like civilian sector. You had mentors for that. How important was that? Because I tell people like straight up, the transition process of getting out of the military was bad when I left. I found out it's still bad, and I'm pretty sure when my dad left the military, it was bad then too. So, like, we have, like I'm like, "Oh, man," like, 10, 20 years from each other, the transition process is still bad.
Mhm.
How is it that you were able to leverage your community to transition smoothly, and what are tips that you would give people who are transitioning
Well, so
out of the military now?
so you have to abandon the notion that you'll ever be deprogrammed, because you won't. They have installed levers and switches and traumas in you at just the right age that they will never be undone. Some of them, a lot of them will never be undone. So what you do instead is you learn how to use them for your career. So it was the example that I saw of these older cats who've been doing this for a while when I was still young blood, was how they used that military experience, that military training, the military culture, and those military mechanisms in a civilian career. The easy one was showing up to work on time, looking like you are capable of doing laundry and working an iron board, right? If you come there not looking like a bag of trash, right? You look what they would call respectable, get a haircut, you'd have some facial hair, but you're gonna keep it close. I grew my hair out long and comb twists and dreads eventually, but still keep them looking nice and neat, that kind of stuff. Being able to code switch, right, effectively was super, super important. Not just code switching our familiar vernacular, right? What we talk about with each other and we ain't in public, but also the vernacular of the military jargon, right? Like how to code switch that into and when it was appropriate and what things were, especially when it came to dealing with women, right? Because the military is very, very male. And, the military has been and continues to be outrageously misogynistic, right? And so how to reprogram that at least to respecting women to do the jobs that they're supposed to do and realizing that it doesn't matter, how heavy a pack you can carry and that kind of stuff. And so seeing those examples helped me out a lot. And also, when I would screw up, as we often do with young bloods, I'm talking to them, it's like, hey man, you can't do that. And here's why, and here's what can happen, them saying like, look, I'm gonna give you a pass on this one this time because, I understand where you're coming from, but you can't do this again. So getting that call out, getting that, what we call it in Marine Corps, we call it counseling, right? Getting that counseling from the people who have been for a while is super critical, super important. So is the advice and the example. That was super important to me coming up. The one thing too that I wanted to mention that was also modeled them is that our perspective is different on what constitutes an emergency or a big deal than anybody else's. And, you
Y'all
know,
can't hear me because I'm on mute, but the minute he said that, I started laughing because that is me 100%.
yeah. So watching people freak out about stuff and being able to be calm without being condescending, because you want to be like, bro, right? I understand this. Nobody is dying. No one's getting shot at. You know, yeah, we're bleeding money. Okay, we'll make more money, but we're all going to go home tonight. You can't say that, to
You can't say that to civilians. I've
they're
gotten in
they're not they're
trouble for
not
that.
they're not ready for that, but just to be like calm, it's like, why are you so calm? I've seen worse. It,
That's what I
um,
do now. I'm like, I've seen worse, but you can't. I think that's where like the empathy comes into play, right? You have to practice empathy. Like, even though you've seen worse, you have to understand that for them, this is their worst, right? This is the bad stuff. For us, that's not the bad stuff, right? Judge them less just because their scales are different, right? Like, that means we did a good job. That's how I
yeah.
look at it. Like, the fact
Well,
that,
it's that
oh yeah,
perspective, right? Understanding that everyone has a different set of experiences and that they're all important on a team. And so understanding that your set of experience is different than mine, I'm not going to yuck your yum on it, and I'm not going to throw shade at you for the most part. Sometimes I will, only when it's appropriate. If someone's in the Navy or the Air Force, and then obviously
wow. Okay. All
you
right.
heard me.
Cool. Yeah, I
Like
heard you.
like
Yes, sir. Very-
like
Yes,
when they
sir.
come in there and try and tell us, "Oh, boot camp was so hard." I'm like, "No, it wasn't," because I have a different perspective from you on what actually hard is.
Well, that's fine that, you had people that hated you, try to get you in the military, like, got jumped in. Yeah, I don't feel bad about being Air Force at all. Do you
Yeah.
say you're worse?
Yeah, I mean, look, like if you don't mind being ashamed of your dress uniform, that's fine.
Wow, shots coming from Crayon Eater. Okay. Uh,
Gourmet crayons, thank you very much. Nothing but the Toronto. We had
wow.
Crayolas. Y'all had them store brand ones.
I'm Air Force. Remember, we don't eat crayons at all. We eat
Y'all
lobster.
you chomping on fountain pens.
Nah, like that. Lobster and swimming pool. We put swimming pools in Iraq. No one is that gangster.
That gangsta is a word you can use.
But, see, well, let me stop before we get in trouble. We gotta be canceled. Oh man,
I
but
got to say this, though, real talk though. This is a thing that civilians do not understand: the interservice rivalries and how we can drag each other to the nth degree, and nobody gets upset about it.
because we know it's like love, like we all understand where this comes from. This is like it's simple. It's closer to sibling rivalry, right?
Yeah.
Than actual like, oh, we don't like each other. And it's so
No.
funny because when we do it on Twitter, I've seen it happens every time we do it on Twitter. It's new people who aren't indoctrinated in veteran culture. They'll come in and they'll start DMing at people like, so why don't you like Marines? Why don't you like Air Force people? And people are like, no, this is just how we talk to each
I
other.
know.
Like, is this in real life? Like, what are you talking about? I love Marines. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we're not really serious because everybody knows for a fact that the Marines are the best service, and we're just any argument to the contrary is just all jokes.
Yeah, you're really effective cannon fodder. So I'll give you that. I like to go in, last after the planes and bombs have gone off.
Yeah,
Guess what
yeah,
comes first? It's
we win your wars and y'all build PXs. That's great.
sounds like a hater from an industry that was born in a bar. Like I'm not, uh, you'll get no rise out of me. I
No,
love
I
the
know.
Air Force. I'll take my PX and my lobster and I'll go
Yeah.
to my real room while you're in the desert and you're like, make sure
No, man,
hold what you're calling barracks.
I was aircrew, bro. I stayed in the officer quarters.
See, there you go. You can't even talk. You can't even talk. You got lucky. You skirted around the worst experience. But yeah, all right. So let's talk about this cloud economist because I'm super interested in this, right? Because it's a portion of the tech career that we don't really get to hear about, right? So, what is a cloud economist, and how do you like? It sounds DevOpsy. It sounds serverless stuff. Like I'm like, okay, I don't know what the I like. Oh, economist is you're saving people money or you're helping people spend money. One or two things in
But
cloud. So I'm like, oh, Azure, AWS and Google Cloud Platform. I'm like, but what is it they really do? I don't know. So
so
like elaborate.
here's what we do. We are cloud computing experts who understand the financial impact of what you do. So we understand the financial impact of your architecture, the financial impact of your code, even line by line, the financial impact of your data schema, right? In your data store, the financial impact of data transfer, the financial impact. So Everything you do, a lot of folks can deal with it in terms of performance or security or reliability, right? But there's not a lot of people, again, talk to it in the context of cost. And I've done, my background work, I can speak to any of those. Less so security, that's probably my weakest one. But definitely resilience, definitely performance and cost, right? So that when you're running, you run your code and you throw it in a container and then it touches all these 4 or 5 things for your architecture, right? I can tell you what your financial impact is going to be. And I can say, if you want to make it more efficient, you want to do this, this, and this instead, in the language of a developer or in the language of a database administrator or in the language of a network engineer or in the language of an infrastructure engineer or DevOps or a site reliability engineer or, project manager, right? So I look at where things cost money and how to make them cost less, or to make not even cost less, but to make sure that you're not spending money unnecessarily.
All right, so let's d- dive into that more because you said a few things. You said, all right, so you're the person that looks at cloud architecture in relation to how much the cost, how much money it is. Then you said about cloud architecture in relation to security and performance. All right, so I'm a CEO. How do I look at cloud? How do I make this a dynamic relationship between, like, how do I make sure that I'm not like when you go in, do you take the idea of, hey, when you're talking about this economy stuff about the cost, are you also looking at, hey, what, I want to make sure that your security stays where it's at, and I want to make sure your performance is where it's at. Are you also taking that part in too when you're doing it? Or is that like, oh, someone else's job? Like, oh, that's your performance guy's job. My job is just cost. Or you're like, all right, this
Mhm.
is stuff to cost while keeping your standards up for security and performance.
Yeah. So our job technically is just cost, but we still have to be aware and conscious of those things. Because if we weren't aware and conscious of those things, everyone's going to run everything on a T3 micro. You know what I'm saying? And that's not the case. So we have to be aware of that, right? So I have to be able to understand that, yes, for your application, you need to have state storage and it has to run on NVMe storage and it has to have this certain CPU. Okay, well, great. But I do understand that you can save 20% by switching this instance type that has the same storage, but a different processor architecture. And as long as your stuff is not compiled against a specific processor architecture, then you can save money just by switching to this. Okay, does this need to be stateful? Can it be stateless? If it's stateless, then we can run on spot. We don't have to run on instances. You can just throw containers that can run in their ephemeral because your state is stored elsewhere. Or I can tell you that you can save money doing this way, and then I can assist you in trying to find ways to do that while still maintaining performance and cost. But cost is our primary consideration.
All right,
But
cool. See, like
but,
that's
but we
something
won't
that's cool.
compromise.
I was like, all right, so your primary objective is cost, but you know also understand that we will not compromise the other two.
Yeah.
See, that's cool. Like, because that means you still have to know those other things
That's why I said we are cloud computing experts who
that
deal
just focus on the
primarily.
money.
Yeah. But our primary context is cost.
Awesome. That's super cool. How did you get in? Like, because cloud wasn't like you just said you're in the game for like 20 years. So
Mhm.
cloud wasn't around when you first started. So how did you transition and grow your career to get to this point where you're a principal cloud economist? Like cloud's been around what, 10 years, 11 years, maybe? Like
AWS
these,
about that. But,
yeah.
the cloud is really, I mean, it's containers, it's VMs, right? It's instantiated hardware, which has existed in some way, shape, or form for a while. I remember, like I said, as VMs, I remember running as Virtuoso, where you do VPSs, essentially the same thing, right? And really, if you want to get down to it, there's a great argument to be made that AWS instances and the notion of cloud computing literally is just an API abstracted for VPSs. And you're abstracting more and more layer like OpenStack and stuff like that, where I'm using an API to provision these things, but they really are at the base level, something that you can understand. What is a load balancer? A load balancer is just an instance. What's an instance? It's a VM. So a load balancer is just a VM that gets dynamically provisioned with certain data, right? IPs and DNS, stuff like that, and rules about where stuff goes, right? And you have automation scripts that if this thing dies or needs to be upsized, you just take the data off of this one, you put in the new one, and you cut the IP address over because it's all virtually abstracted anyways. That's essentially what that everything else that is built on cloud computing is, and that is a variation on that, no matter what it is. It is a service or an API, which is still just a service that runs on virtualized hardware that is run on real hardware. All of it.
All right,
Literally,
so
when you saw the sticker that said the cloud is just someone else's computer, that's absolutely true.
so what you're saying is just that essentially starting from there, you've just been able to just transition and grow as
Mhm.
as in industry transform, right?
Yep.
So it's essentially like hardware scale is
Yeah.
how that happened, and virtualizing at scale.
Back when infrastructure as code was a zip file full of bash scripts that you would just FTP from server to server, right? As you
It's
configured them, right?
like infrastructure as code back then was FTP. So
Yeah, FTP and bash is all it was, right? It's
man,
like really what is Ansible but root keys in a for loop.
you're absolutely right.
The when you look at how the industry has grown, I was in it at a good time where I was there for when VMs started becoming popular. I was there for dealing with those. I was there for, when Puppet came out, Chef came out, and all the various infrastructure as code methods, or writing your own stuff in Perl or in Python. And then, this new thing with some bookstore came out where you can use their computers, right? And I was like, all right, well, cool. And that's what we did. So I remember the first versions of Azure. I remember the first version and the first time I used AWS. And so I've been using it before they were commonplace. Just like when I first started, really messing around with computers when I got out of the Marine Corps, like we weren't even at Red Hat 1.0. It was like my first version was like 0.83B or something like that I got out of a Linux magazine. So like being around at the forefront of what we considered, at the forefront of like the LAMP stack and the forefront of what we look at now when we were still hosting websites on cPanel and stuff like that. Going from there to where we are now was incremental and it was iterative, just like technology ends up being. So now where we are with where we're running containers and containers are basically what VMs were 10 years ago, right? And then serverless, which I still think is funny because, or no ops or all that kind of stuff like that, which is still requires ops. It's just someone else is doing the ops, still requires servers, just someone else's server. It's just iterations of the same thing, right? It's still variations on a theme. And so they're easy to understand. After you've been exposed and you're familiar with them, it's easy to understand how the new things come out and how they fit into the ecosystem, right? So when you're looking at it in the context of cost, right? You're trying to use the bare minimum that you can use, like the thin provisioning thing, right? When you do thin provisioning, right, you would do that because you're trying to use the bare minimum that still meet the requirements, right? Because it costs less. You're trying to make it as dense as possible, right? And that's back then when everything was a capex and you had to buy everything from the get go, right? But now we're sitting in a consumption model, right? Okay, well, what can we consume the most of that will cost us the least? And you start from there.
Yeah, I like how you said that the consumption model. We don't really, especially if you're in serverless, you don't think about the cost. You only really start thinking about the cost when it's too late. When you're building things, the last thing you think about is the AWS bill. It's going to be,
Oh, yeah.
it's usually when the AWS bill lands, you're like, what the hell
Yeah.
is that?
What's funny is because we'll have real time alerting on every aspect from performance to resilience to security, but we don't talk about cost until the end of the month or at the end of the quarter. And that's not just the fault of devs or anything like that, right? We don't have instrumentation around cost.
Intentional.
And I'm not talking to you, Datadog, and I'm talking to you, New Relic, and I'm talking to you, all your APM vendors who have all these things where you can tell me the response time of a single JavaScript, but you can't tell me how much my application stack is costing me in real time. You can, the calls are there. I can extrapolate how much I'm spending if I know how many instances this application is using, and I know how much data transfer is being sent back and forth, and I know how many tables are hitting. I know all these numbers because I have to have it for performance reasons. But no one is going to just take that and multiply it by how much it costs a minute, so I can get alerting on that real time, or not even alerting, just awareness, just basic observability into it. So cost is always reactive and it needs to change.
To a proactive state.
proactive saves, so that when you benchmark performance, you can benchmark cost.
That is profound. All right. So let's switch focus here a little bit because I love that. And we can talk about this type of stuff all day. But let's bring some type of love back to the juniors. I want to try to do that for them too. All right. So I am a new dev or a new person that's interested in learning how to code, interested in what this type stuff you're doing because I feel like what you do is fun. Like, I feel like I follow Quinn online. He's hilarious. You have a dope boss. And the idea of, hey, your job is to understand cloud computing for an aspect of helping people save money. How would I, if I was just at the military and I heard a podcast with you on it, found out, oh snap, that dude's a Marine like me. What would you tell the person first day out? What would you tell them, like how to get to where you are? Like, how do they get to be able to do the same conferences and rooms and conversations where you are on this subject?
First thing I'm going to tell them is to ignore the coding bootcamp. That your ability to code is going to be tangential, right? I am objectively, at best, a mediocre developer. At best, on my good days, right? Because all I write are automations or scripts or traps. I'm taking things that I would manually type into a console and I'm approaching them programmatically and I'm writing functions to do those. And that's it. I would be, if you had to pay me $1 million to write, a JavaScript front end for just a basic application, I would not ever see that $1 million. But if you're going to pay me $1 million to write something that will automatically reschedule Kubernetes containers somewhere else under a situation of events, I can do that, right? But I'm going to probably write that in Python and it's going to be ugly, but effective, like my jujitsu, you know, it's going to
So
be,
you don't
it's,
believe in writing idiomatic Python out
no,
here?
I don't care about none of that. I just want the world. Right. And I'll say this again. I code like Beyonce sings, just good enough to get the job done.
I just want to take a moment, let everybody know that Jerome did not say that. He doesn't agree with what Tim said. I love Beyonce. Don't send the beehive after me. He is on Twitter. Find him. Do you want to say your Twitter name on this after this? I didn't say that. I'm deathly afraid of the beehive. Whatever you ladies call yourselves, I did not do that. So at Tim, don't at me. Don't come for me. I didn't do it. No.
Cool.
I just
So
want to make
I,
sure everybody knows it's the Marine that did it, not the Airman, because Air Force was smart.
no,
I
they're
want to smoke.
scared. This is what it is. They're scared. They won't say.
Same
But
thing.
I'm the Beyonce of code, right? Just put it like I look real pretty when I do it, but I don't do it so great. But
Oh, I'm about to take
but
off my mic.
but at the same time, like what I'm concerned more about is how things work. Where does the code run? What does the code do? So I have an understanding of the code, right? But what I'm more interested in is how the infrastructure works, right? What is an instance? What does it do? So take your AWS courses, right? I'm not going to endorse any specific online course, but go take the AWS courses. Go take your AWS certs. Go start looking at that cloud practitioner and that certified solutions architect and the DevOps ones, right? And start looking at some of the underlying technologies of what people run on them, the databases, the data stores, the NoSQL stuff, the network aspects, learn those things, right? Once you get familiar with that, and then you can do some SRE work, some DevOps work, right? Then stop doing that and then start talking to customers who are doing that work and understanding what they are doing and what their concerns are and how you can help them, right? And so that was the real big transition for me, stepping away from frontline engineering and moving in as a TAM and talking to customers and being empathetic to customers and using my talents and my understanding of the technology to talk to developers, to talk to engineering managers, to talk to product managers, to talk to CFOs, to talk to CTOs and CEOs of startups and Fortune 100 companies, right? And be able to deal with their concerns and advocate for them back to the company and advocate for the good and best practices of the company stuff and overall engineering best practices back to the people that can make those cultural changes, right? And so once you do that, then you can do what I do. And if you ask Corey Quinn, who I work for, he will tell you that the set of skills it takes to be a principal cloud economist are very rare, because I don't just have the engineering chops, which I have, and I don't just have the understanding of how the stuff works, which I have. I also know how to talk to people and listen to people and understand what it is they're trying to do, and to take the context of what they want and put that into a way to help them accomplish it while being as cost efficient as possible. And that's going to
That's
take a long time.
it isn't, but that's perfect. And I love how that aspect that's a soft skill that people treat as like it's just not in coding, that learning how to talk to people. I feel like that's the most important skill as a developer that you can cultivate,
Yeah.
because that's gonna like it separates you from the pack. Being able to be social and integrate with people who are on the business side, coming from the tech side, being able to go from both sides, that is like that's the true secret sauce. And most people I deal with, that's the number one secret sauce of their career.
What's funny is that we call it a soft skill, and it's one of the hardest things to be able to do. Like, computers are easy. Learning how to code, comparatively, versus learning how to deal with people and talk to people of varying backgrounds and varying concerns and varying levels of experience and understanding what the concerns are, that's hard. It is very hard. So we shouldn't call that the soft skill. That's the hard stuff. Is the very hard stuff, right? You know, my 7-year-old can write Python.
Ironically, they do teach kids in France, like
Yeah.
second graders, how to write Python. Yeah, you're
But
right. I tell
but
people
but
all the time.
but have that 7-year-old have to have an emotionally intelligent conversation with somebody whose startup is on the line.
Yes, that's true. Like that's hard. People are dynamic, they're evolving. You can't, I mean, computers are pretty much always the same. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, no matter how smart, I'm sorry, you guys are my dog. Like, UPS is here. But yeah, computers are pretty much, they're the same. Whereas people are dynamic, they change. That's what we are. But yeah. All right. So we're about to wrap up. Give me what things you want to shamelessly plug? Like, how do people find you on Twitter? How do we find Dutch Bill? How do we find Corey?
Uh,
You know,
I'm at Elchefe, Elchefe on Twitter. You can find Corey, probably the best way. He's also on Twitter as Quinnipig, QUINNYPIG. But it's best for you to go onto your podcast provider of choice and look for Screaming in the Cloud, which is the Corey's podcast that's done by the Duckbill Group. And I've been on there a couple times. I've been on some other podcasts, so you can listen. I'm so happy that you can just literally search my name in Spotify now and find me, which is the cool thing to say.
that is the coolest thing. I have a whole playlist of like podcasts I like. It's whenever my mom, or whenever not my mom, but my little brother, whenever he starts talking swag,
Mm.
I like just like show him
Well,
this. Like, this is my face.
I can't let my kids listen to half my podcast because I'm trying to be professional here, but not always. But the other thing too, you can book me for your talks or for your panels. You got a conference and we talk internally, stuff like that. I'm not free unless it's a community event. If it's a community event, I can be free. But if it's your corporate stuff, and you probably do want me to talk to corporations because I've been around for a while, you're going to have to pay me, and that's okay.
All right. Tim with the spice, y'all. All right. And be sure to continue to follow us on podcasts. We're going to talk to people like Tim, who Marine, minority. He's in cloud. He's doing all of the things that, we want our constituents to do. We want the people that come in after us to do. We want to try to lift people up behind us. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can follow me at Jerome Hardaway, and you can check us out on the GitHub sponsors list as well. We're there, and especially if you want to sponsor our podcast, just go there and check the GitHub sponsor platform for that, and we'll bring on a sponsor. Other than that, this is us saying goodbye. Bye, everybody.
See ya.